friends, and welcome to Conversations with Consequences, where we are changing the culture one conversation at a time. We are the radio show and podcast of the Catholic Association. We address the issues that interest you, puzzle you, inflame you in the hope that we can bring some clarity, even to the darkest corners. You can listen to Conversations with Consequences on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network, Saturday mornings at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, or you can catch the encore at 5 p.m. We are also on SiriusXM Channel 130. Our radio show is always a podcast. Go to thecatholicassociation.org/podcasts or directly to wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'm your hostess, Dr. Grazie Christie. Really happy to be with you this week and also to bring you some great guests. We have a good friend and Vatican expert with us at the end of the hour. His name is Edward Pentin, and he's with the National Catholic Register. We want to discuss with him the situation in Afghanistan, specifically recent reports that the Holy See has made efforts to convene talks with the Taliban, as the situation on the ground there is so dire. Vatican correspondent Edward Pentin has the latest on this hopeful news. He also will share with us the latest news regarding Cardinal Raymond Burke, who is sick with COVID, but I think doing better. We'll hear more about that from Edward. First, we turn our attention to the lovely Sisters of Life. They do tremendous work helping women choose life. Sister Mary Grace is with us, alongside our mutual, very good friend, Kathryn Lopez of the National Review. She works very closely with the sisters and campaigns for life every day on her feet, on the sidewalks, and also in the National Review and all the great work that she does. Welcome to the show, Kathryn and Sister Mary Grace.
Thank you. Such a gift to be here.
Sister, we wanted to take some time here on our show and highlight the wonderful work that you and your fellow sisters do. We wanted to hear about it and get our listeners interested in it and praying for your work and in knowing more about how the church, all of us being the church, of course, we're not just about ideas and promoting good things. As much as that is important, we're also about physically helping with our hands and embracing the results of a pro-life culture.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one heart at a time, but it's also a totally dependent on a combined effort. We're all in this together, and that's one of the biggest gifts that we have as Sister of Life is kind of on the front line, being able to see people from all different walks of life come together, and that can be sometimes the most supportive and powerful assistance we can give anyone, is to give them a sense of we being with them, community, and a swell, really a whole groundswell of people uniting to be there for them.
There's nothing like human contact. There's nothing like seeing sympathy in a fellow human being's eyes, an arm ready to embrace. I think that's without that we can really do no good, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, God has entrusted a particular vision of his self and his love to every human life. So we're all entrusted with this incredible gift, not only to give of ourselves, but really reveal the face of God and his love and his life to the world and each other. And you're right, you can't replace a hug. You can't replace looking into someone's eyes and communicating, I'm with you, you're not alone. God is merciful. All those things that we know and believe in our heart really become incarnate when we actually communicate them by word or a smile or, picking someone up for an appointment or just sending them a text or encouraging them that we're there for them. That human relationship, for sure, it tells us who God is. He's personal and he's real. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sister, give us a thumbnail sketch of the Sisters of Life, who you are, where you are, and what is your mission, your vocation?
Absolutely. That's a great question. Well, we, as you said, we're the Sisters of Life, and we're a Catholic religious community of sisters that in essence believe that every person is good. That every single human life, no matter what we're going through, what we've been through, what we've done or haven't yet done, that we're good. We're inherently sacred. And each one of us is a unique reflection of God himself. But, it's easy to say these things in passing or even hear it at church or hear it growing up, but today it can be even more easier to forget. Or, maybe no one's ever spoken that truth to us. Or, it's something we've kind of taken for granted. But the good news is that God doesn't forget these things about us. He doesn't forget the way he loved us and what he made us for. And his plans are good for us. And we get to see this every day with the women that we get to work with. We do a number of different missions that includes women who are struggling with a pregnancy and helping them really to experience themselves as loved and supported, whether that be practical physical, emotional needs and accompaniment so that they can make a decision in freedom, really, and courage, and not be bound or set back by fear. We also offer weekend retreats for people of all walks of life and at different points in their life, just to rest again in the truths of who we are and why we're made, and rest in the goodness of God's plan for us, and that He's with us and for us, and kind of be restored in those truths on a weekend getaway so that we can re-enter back into our lives based on the true reality of our lives as gift. And we also we do a bunch of other things. We also give talks and different opportunities for evangelization. We come and visit places that want to know the truth and delve in it more about their own goodness and meaning and purpose in life, because it's so easily forgotten today. And often the world can tell us, unless you achieve, earn, or prove yourself, you're only worthy of love and respect, and that's so not true. This is a gift that each one of us has, that we're really made in God's image and likeness, and we have a profound dignity without doing anything, but just simply being ourselves. And we also have the great gift of walking alongside women who have suffered the experience of an abortion, and see the infinite mercy of God meet them where they are, heal them, and restore them to a new life and depth that they often didn't think was imaginable for them before. And so to see new life breathe into every walk of life is such a gift for us as sisters, and really gives us as sisters faith to believe and see the wonders of God in each human heart as we walk with and accompany people.
What a collection of beautiful things that you do, so needed in this world that's so atomized. People are so alone and fragmented. And sister, how many of there are you, and where are you located?
That's a good question. We are healthy and growing, which is good. We're just over about 115 now, around about there, and we're looking forward to welcoming, actually, in the house that I serve in here, 10 brave young women that are going to courageously enter our community in about a month's time.
Amazing.
And we're spread out all over the U.S. And we're also in Canada. So most of our missions, we were kind of born and raised in New York City. Our founder, Cardinal O'Connor, was a Navy chaplain, and also the Archbishop of New York at the time in 1991, when he really received the inspiration from the Holy Spirit to raise up a community of young women who would essentially lay down their lives for the truth that every person is good, and to really proclaim that with their lives, because it's worthy. It's a truth worthy of every person being filled with and reminded of, and all of us need to hear that every day and to be reminded of it in our day and culture. So it will allow us to grow in the identity of who we really are, and that is children of God, which really sets us free.
If there are any listeners who lose hope sometimes about our youth, and then they hear you say that you have 10 young women who are ready to lay down their lives and just serve God and their fellow man for the rest of their lives, that's beyond thrilling, and it fills all of our hearts with hope. Kathryn, when you are very close to the Sisters for Life, almost every time I see you at some function or another, you have one or two of these wonderful ladies with you, sometimes more. And how did you meet them, and how did you become so intimate with them?
Gracie, you love the adoption topic, and I actually remember there is an event that I did at a Jewish office on adoption, and we had there's a picture, this great picture where there was one row of yarmulkes and one row of veil. And it was just a beautiful ecumenical coming together in New York. I met the sisters very long time ago when I was doing pro-life work in New York City, and the sisters have always have since Cardinal O'Connor run the Respect Life Office in the Archdiocese of New York. And one of the things that I love the most about the Sisters of Life, first of all, they're our pro-life credibility. Cardinal O'Connor said, if there's a woman who needs help who's pregnant and needs help, come to the Catholic Church. And the Sisters of Life are how the Church provides, having women live with them and all the other different ministries, as Sister Mary Grace outlined. But they also show us the way to be pro-life. How do you build a culture of life? They really are manifestation of the gospel of life that John Paul II wrote about in Evangelium Vitae all those many years ago. And they show us that you can't it's not enough to oppose abortion. It's not enough to want Roe v. Wade overturned. It's not enough to defund Planned Parenthood. We have to love people into life. You know, they have a very popular prayer called the Litany of Trust. And the beginning of the prayer is from the belief that I have to earn your love. Deliver me, Jesus. From the fear that I am unlovable. Deliver me, Jesus. Pray this prayer and you realize, first of all, oh wait, it must not only be me, you know, because somebody thought to write a prayer and mass produce it. And, you know, so many of the girls and young women who go into abortion clinics are feeling like they're unlovable, you know, that's in many cases why they're having sex in the first place, you know, that they could never do this. The sister can tell many more stories than I can, but I've seen with my own eyes girls be in front of Planned Parenthood, then go to the Sisters of Life convent and just be loved. The first word they say to you is not, don't have an abortion, you know, it's do you want some tea, you know, get comfortable, you know, they encounter them as human beings because it's not hatred of abortion, it's love of the poor woman who even begins to contemplate it out of that wretched place that her heart is in. Exactly. What a beautiful focus to put the focus on loving that poor woman. So the Sisters of Life really are showing us how we can love with an issue, you know, the abortion issue and assisted suicide and all these threats to innocent human life. They really have become so politicized, and the sisters sort of humanize the issue again by leading with love, which is what we need to do. You know, again, pro-lifers, I worry sometimes we're busy and there's the temptation to just have your position or maybe just give a donation to the Sisters of Life, which you should absolutely consider doing. But also, do the people in our lives know that it's not judging that we're about? If you are pregnant and it was not planned, we will help you. We will love you. We will not judge you. I do worry sometimes, even when I'm standing outside an abortion clinic praying the rosary, especially in New York, there's such hostility. I worry that people think that we're judging as we're praying, pray for us sinners. You know, I stand out there penitential that, you know, we haven't been able to love these women better, you know, who deserve so much better than walking into an abortion clinic. And, you know, and so many of the women that stand outside abortion clinics and pray are themselves hurt by abortion. And what they're trying to do, and maybe other people don't understand this, is what they're trying to do is they're trying to keep other women safe from what hurt them, because their lives have become in so many ways a misery of regret and self-reproach. And you're right. I think most of us are activated by love, but how do we make that more present to others like the Sisters of Life do? There's something about your habits and your veils, your set apartness that inspires so much trust, Sister Mary, and it inspires trust in the human heart, because we can see by the way you dress that you have made an act of great love, and that you are ready to love the people around you with that unconditional love with which you know God loves you.
Yeah, it's powerful. You know, I've only ever experienced the habit to be a bridge to people, really. You know, there's something powerful in it, that it communicates to someone, whether or not we even speak to them directly, but seeing a sister can often, really proclaim the truth that God is with us. You know, He has not forgotten us. He is not distant and far off. He's actually right beside us. He's on the streets. He's walking on the pavements. He's interested in us, invested in us, and He's really for us. It's awesome to have the experiences that we do have, even just walking on the streets, and people just really, it helps with conversation. You know, small chat is very limited when you're wearing the habit of a sister, because people know what you're about, and they know that you're there for you inherently most of the time, and that really allows an openness for people to receive the truth that God's with them. You know, and He's not here to judge and set us apart, but He's really here to welcome us home and respect our freedom and give us an opportunity to live for something more than ourselves, to have a hope that there might be something more than just what we see visibly with our eyes. You know, that that there's a deeper meaning and a journey that we're all on.
If you're just joining us, you're listening to Conversations with Consequences. I'm your hostess, Dr. Grazie Christie, and we're talking to Kathryn Lopez of the National Review, and also to Sister Mary Grace of the Sisters of Life, a growing, beautiful order of nuns that devotes themselves in a large part to showing the face of love. So, Sister, how did you find your vocation to the Sisters of Life?
That's a great question. God really found me. I definitely didn't grow up dreaming this would be a natural consequence in my life. I grew up on the beach, Sydney side in Australia, and I never even met a sister growing up, so it was never on the horizon. But God has a plan for each one of us, and He knows exactly the right time to invite us and to draw us closer to Himself. I was actually my first year out in high school, and there was a big Catholic event that came to Sydney, Australia, called World Youth Day. And it's one of these big events where really hundreds of thousands of Catholics descend upon one country. It's incredible and inspiring. But it wasn't in the big events that I really experienced the possibility of a vocation. And that was actually when I met the sisters at just a small event during this World Youth Day event. And I remember the first time I met the sisters, I was honestly just really taken aback by them. They were real, they were joyful, and they were actually women deeply in love with someone. And I'd grown up Catholic my whole life, and it was definitely, it was a devotional faith. Like, I loved it. We went to Mass on Sundays. We prayed the Rosary when we could. But it wasn't until I met the sisters that I really was awakened to the reality that Christianity is falling in love with the God who loved us first. And I saw that in these sisters. They embodied it. And that really kind of sparked a journey for myself to really just search for this God that was personal and real and actually made a difference in people's lives. And so I just pursued the sisters and kind of kept in touch with them for a couple of years. But I also went on to study and get a degree in theology and really honestly just wanted to spend the rest of my life either competing in sports or organizing sports events. That was kind of my world dream, to make the Olympics one day. That I thought I'd be pretty happy with that. But the more I searched and pursued that path, the more I could notice a restlessness in my heart that actually ached for more. And every time I thought of them more, I kept thinking about the way these sisters were living with love and life, and I wanted more of that. And so eventually I gave in, and I made a secret trip to the U.S. and visited the sisters in the convent here in New York City. And I was, I at that point, I still didn't know what God wanted. But I realized that, I had to ask God, what did He want for my life? What was His plan for me? And waiting in the silence, He really spoke to my heart, in a very simple but real way that we know when truth is spoken to us, that He wanted me for Himself. Being asked that question of, would you follow me with your whole heart? My heart really had a response of its own that I wanted to follow Him with everything. And so I went home and began to slowly pack up my life. And I've made the big trip across from Sydney to New York. And it's now been 8 years that I've been a Sister of Life. And I'm constantly surprised by how much more Christ is constantly offering those who pursue Him, and how much He respects our freedom and really just wants us to be happy.
How delightful, Sister! What a beautiful vocation story, and there's so much certainty in it. I guess when it's like falling in, it's like any kind of falling in love, right? Your eyes become full of that one person, and that's all you can see, and you make it happen, right?
Yeah, and without a doubt, there were challenges almost every step of the way, and there still are, But the beautiful thing about the struggles, leaving home and daring to believe that God's plan for me is the best plan, like all those things that we all struggle with, is God really for me? And bringing them to Him and allowing Him the space to respond and speak to us has allowed me to really see how God will take care of everything in His time and His way. We might not always see immediately what He's doing or why, but He definitely gives us the grace at every point. And over time, sometimes He allows us to see what He was doing, and a lot of the times He invites us to trust Him in the mystery, that He's always for us, and He's always going to make something good and beautiful out of pursuing Him and following Him and trusting that He's going to be there.
And Sister, were you always pro-life, or was that something that, of course, you believed, but maybe you weren't so invested in it before you became a Sister of Life?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. Yeah, I really was convicted actually when I was in high school, and I remember this. I would have been about 16 years old, and we were asked in one of our religion classes to choose any kind of human rights movement in the world and then go and do a research topic on it. And I remember looking through all the sufferings of humanity, and looking across, all the different ways the human person is attacked or suffering or lacking. And for some reason at that age when I was 16, when I read about the reality of abortion, abortion, and the vulnerability not only of these children that haven't been given the chance to live, but also these women that find themselves in situations where they feel like they don't have the support they need, or they're left alone, shattered my 16-year-old heart. And I thought, oh my goodness, how can we let this happen? And what more can we do to let these children see life, and to allow these young women and women of all ages to experience the gift of other women being there for them. And I experienced that in my own life of times when I've struggled or had low moments or really struggled through life. It's when women have come together and stood by each other that has been one of the most liberating and powerful experiences. And I wanted that for other women that were my age, other young girls that were going through potentially an experience like that, to know that women standing by women is powerful and that it can set us all free.
It would be wonderful if our whole culture reflected that kind of solidarity. Solidarity with babies, solidarity with women, solidarity with the family. And Kathryn, you wrote a piece, a really fabulous piece in National Review, and you connected some dots for us. Later on in the show, we'll be talking to Edward Pentin, about the terrible situation in Afghanistan. And you connected for us, Kathryn, how this is the name of the title of the piece, "We Fail to Value Life in Afghanistan as at Home." I think you really, again, connected the dots as to how a disdain for the most basic respect that we have as human beings, that solidarity for each other, the idea that all human beings are somehow valuable, is missing in our culture in abortion here, and also in these terrible scenes we're seeing in Afghanistan.
Yeah, if you go back and read Humani Vitae, Paul VI told us all of this would happen. So much of what we're looking at in the world today. Yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is, like, he talked about how with the introduction of artificial contraception, you're ultimately pitting man against woman, you know? And of course, with abortion, mother against child. And so if that most fundamental bond is broken, of course, we're going to have so many different kinds of violence. I would even go so far, I mean, the violence that we tolerate in TV and music, it all, I believe, goes back to abortion and the fact that we look away from it. We pretend it's healthcare. We pretend it's women's empowerment. It's miserable. And the more you spend time near abortion clinics, talking with women who are going in, who are so scared or so hardened because they've been hurt so much, it makes everything else make sense. You know, there's this poison in our bloodstream, and it's not going to get better until we reject abortion. That's not just overturning Roe, like we were saying before. It means really living the kinds of things that Sister Mary Grace has been talking about. I would recommend everybody who's just sort of shocked watching what's happening in Afghanistan, or was shocked by the violence last summer, go back and read Evangelium Vitae. You know, the Gospel of Life really shows us how we can live differently, and it's an opportunity offered to us. I think to some extent we've missed the boat, and the existence of the Sisters of Life shows us what's possible if we really take up that rallying cry that John Paul II issued, and that Cardinal O'Connor was so much a part of in founding the Sisters of Life.
It is just all one garment, isn't it? One beautifully woven garment. You choose life at the beginning, at conception. You choose life at the end, when people are elderly and vulnerable and sick. You choose life. If you keep consistently choosing life, then our world becomes a world of peace and mutual respect. And you're right, it's a poison in our blood, because we've made, in our country, in our culture, we've made a fundamental choice to choose death. To choose death in order to liberate ourselves sexually, although I always think, we're really liberating unscrupulous men more than anyone else.
And it really does become a kind of enslavement. I don't listen to a lot of pop music anymore, but I recently heard a Rihanna song that it was called Rude Boy. And it was so clear that the message was, women, use men or they're going to use you. And it was such a misery to hear, but this is what I'm seeing outside abortion clinics and in the streets of Manhattan. And girls deserve better than this, and the men need to know that there's more to life than this. And I also want to mention, Gracie, I just want to plug the Sisters of Life website. You can get a nice, deeper introduction into the sisters and their life and their ministry there, and some of the opportunities that you can avail yourselves of, like the retreats. There's also a quarterly called Imprint that you can subscribe to for free, which is really a beautiful, beautiful little magazine. And I mentioned the Litany of Trust prayer. You can order some on the website. There's some other things. There's a beautiful children's book. And there's also, just out in the last week or so, there's actually a new Litany of Trust retreat book that you can get from Emmaus Press. And I highly recommend it. They're all tools to help you live the charism of the Sisters of Life, which is ultimately what we are called to as Christians in the world today.
And what is the name of, how do we reach that website, sister?
It's sistersoflife.org. So it's www.sistersoflife.org. And the good news too, like, gosh, as we talk about this and even see the troubles and the chaos that I think even as Catholics we can sometimes see even more. It's like we can see the mess all the more, which can be a burden. But, the surprising and good news that Jesus Christ has given us is that there's nothing bigger than the love and mercy of God. That in the midst of all the darkness and chaos and confusion, Jesus Christ has the answers. And, we're a seeking humanity that is desperate to know who we are. And we need to be reminded of those truths. But to be relieved to know that Christ he has won this battle for us, and he alone can reveal each one of us to ourselves, who we are as gift and known by him and chosen to know life. And, I can never hear enough the truth of God's mercy that, even at the times when, all of us don't choose life, whether we were not free to or we just made bad decisions, that God's mercy goes even there, and that our histories and even the ways that we've failed or struggle at the moment don't define us. It's the love of God and his plan for us, which is a fullness of life, which is healing, which is freedom. So we never need to be afraid to really seek the Lord and let him define us with his love and life.
Well, Sister Mary Grace, you inspire us and fill us with hope and also with the knowledge of God's mercy, which is really the only thing we need to know in the end. Yeah, and so that was sistersoflife.org, and please be assured of our prayers. And if we would like to support your organization, would that be the right place to go also?
Yes, absolutely. You go to our website. That's so kind of you.
We will certainly be going there. Thank you very much. And I thank you, Kathryn, also for being here with us today. And
thank you for highlighting the work of the sisters. It's really a great mercy that we have them in the world today.
Thank you both.
We're in it together.
Welcome back to Conversations with Consequences. I'm your hostess, Dr. Grazie Christie, and we're happy to introduce Edward Pentin back to the show. He's a Vatican correspondent for the National Catholic Register. He broke some very interesting news this week regarding the Holy See making efforts to hold talks with the Taliban in an effort to quell the catastrophic situation on the ground. Welcome to the show, Edward.
Thanks, good to be with you.
It's great to have you on again. It's always wonderful to get your perspective from over in Rome, where you have your finger on the pulse of things going on at the Vatican. We're very curious here as to how the Vatican is reacting to this terrible catastrophe that is happening right now in Afghanistan. The videos and the images coming out of that beleaguered country are so sad and so shocking. You wrote a wonderful piece in the National Catholic Register about the Holy See reportedly pressing for talks with the Taliban to avert a humanitarian catastrophe.
That's right, yes. I mean, it's not been confirmed. I was unable to get confirmation from the Vatican. Unfortunately, during August, a lot of the staff go away for the month for their summer holiday. But it does seem to be the Holy See's position that they're trying to open up talks, at least between the Taliban and regional political leaders such as Turkey, and bring in Western nations as well, in order to avert a humanitarian catastrophe over there and to try to create a humanitarian corridor. There's allegations that they actually have opened channels with the Taliban in order to do this. There was a letter written by a well-known veteran Italian journalist and lobbyist here called Luigi Bisignani, who said that, in fact, these channels have been opened, a confidential channel by the Holy See, in order to create this sort of fully functioning humanitarian corridor. But there's nothing really to confirm that. But what we do know is that the Vatican has been putting out quite a lot of messages, but first of all by the Pope and his appeal at the Angelus 200 years ago, and also by an editorial in L'Osservatore Romano, the Vatican newspaper, which called for the need to negotiate with the Taliban in order to create such a corridor. So that seems to be their approach, and it's not unusual for the Vatican to do this and to sort of weigh in on the humanitarian concerns in a crisis like this.
So their main thrust of what they're hoping to achieve is a way to get the people who are in terrible danger from the Taliban, the religious minorities, people who participating with the non-Taliban government, the Afghan government, with the outside people like the United States, to give those people a way out? Or are they hoping that talks with the Taliban will help the Taliban be less remorseless in their attitude towards their enemies?
Well, I think that's the latter, certainly, Grazie. Yeah, I think they think they can perhaps get the Taliban to dialogue in order to create this humanitarian corridor. And what we hear now, though, of course, is that the Taliban they've made up their mind that they're not going to extend this August 31st deadline to get the evacuees out. And so the time is of the essence, and the emergency is increasing. So I think the Vatican is keen to weigh in on that and to try to help do its bit. The Pope, he said in his Angelus address that he needed the importance of dialogue. He often stresses the importance of dialogue, and he hoped that, as he put it, the din of weapons ends and the solutions can be found around a table of dialogue. So that seems to be their position. I think it's, from what I've seen and from some of the commentary, it's going to be very difficult to get the Taliban to do this. I think they made up their mind, and they say, I saw today that they said, well, if you Western nations can take out those who you think eligible to be migrants and to immigrate into your countries, but after the 31st, that window of opportunity will close. And so, as I say, I think it is becoming quite a serious emergency over there now. So
the religious minorities who have been living in Afghanistan and are seeing the country take over by the Taliban, we hear sometimes, the Taliban has changed, there's a new Taliban. Do you think that they have any reason to believe that the Taliban has changed, that they're going to be treated with any kind of compassion or pity? I don't think so, Grazie. I think the concern is that, in fact, they might be even more of a ragtag, rather barbaric bunch, and I think that's the feeling that I think there is over there. I spoke briefly with the only Catholic missionary out there, he's a Barnabite father, Giovanni Scalese, who's an Italian who's been out there for I think over a decade or more. And he was very concerned. He didn't really want to say anything, but he did say that it's a very difficult moment. He didn't predict, I read an interview, which I put in the piece, that he gave an interview earlier this year expecting that the Afghan government would stay and that there would be some sort of power-sharing agreement with the Taliban. But that hasn't happened. Of course, the Afghan government has fallen, and so it really is a serious and precarious situation, especially for the Christians there and the religious minorities. As you say, there are only, I think, an estimated 10,000 Christians out of a population of 27 million, and of those, there's only about 200 Catholics there, apparently in a census registration there in 2018. And so they're very few, but they're obviously a minority, and obviously very scared and apprehensive about the whole situation. So yes, it is a great concern for the Christian minority there. That sounds terrifying when I think about it.
Yes, and of course there's been these stories, which I put in the piece, that they're going around to Christians' houses and accusing them of being spies and watching the underground churches and so forth. That's been done in the past, and that was actually happened 10 years ago or 11 years ago as well. So there's sort of precedent there. There's a certain persecution, of course, in Afghanistan. But Father Scalese said, one thing I can tell you is to pray for us. And I think that's the appeal that they would all say, I expect.
Yeah, we definitely have to pray for them. What a terrible fate to be sitting there and just waiting to see what happens at the hands of the Taliban for them. Well, for so many, right? Whether they're people who collaborated with the U.S. and other countries or helped the real Afghan government. And you quoted from the Vatican newspaper, L'Osservatore Romano, that the Vatican accused nations, and I'm quoting, who had a responsible role in Afghanistan of not foreseeing such an emergency, saying it was surprising such a scenario was not envisaged, or worse, that nations were aware of such a probable crisis and nothing was done to avoid it. That's a pretty strong statement, I think, of pointing fingers, laying blame as to the way that this withdrawal has been handled.
Indeed, yes. I mean, they didn't name the Biden administration or any government by name, but they did say that, and there's obviously great concern that they said that, there hasn't been much foresight in all of this, there hasn't been much preparation, and that they should have envisioned this. And if they, as you say, if they knew that it's going to happen and still didn't do anything to avoid it, well, that's even worse. And they say there's a responsibility for the Western nations, particularly the US, to ensure that there is this humanitarian corridor and that these people can get out in time. So that's very much their line, yeah. So
that editorial in L'Osservatore was headlined, "The Responsibility to Welcome the Tragedy of Fleeing Afghans." And that has always been the attitude of the Vatican over the many years of a refugee crisis that has been going on for so many different reasons, from in the Middle East and migrants fleeing their own countries and many of them ending up in Europe. Pope Francis has always stressed that the West has the responsibility to welcome those fleeing. Is there any appetite or in fact any capacity for accepting many more millions of fleeing Middle Easterners into first Turkey and then of course Europe? What do you think about that?
Yes, well, I think the Vatican has actually said, I can't remember where exactly, but I think there was appeal that the regional governments like Turkey, like those surrounding Afghanistan, accept these refugees, and that they have the most. They should really try there first, and then if the Western nations can take them, that's good too. But it's really a regional responsibility of regional governments to help these refugees. There are already many in some of the neighbouring countries. They've been fleeing over the past year, I believe. So there are already refugee camps set up in the neighbouring countries, and so I think they feel that they have a responsibility to take them first of all. But yeah, the Vatican does often appeal to this need to take refugees, and I think that the debate is whether they should be restricted in some way or they should just be in a sort of open door policy. And I think the Vatican leans more to the latter, I believe. But it's not totally against sort of a restricted policy either.
If you're just joining us, you're listening to Conversations with Consequences. I'm your hostess, Dr. Grazie Christie, and we're speaking to Edward Pentin. Edward, there is, I wonder how that sits with a country like Turkey that already has so many refugees, to be told by Western powers that created this horrible catastrophe in Afghanistan and this sudden wave of migrants, how it sits with them to be told that they should be the ones to absorb them and not the richer West.
Yes, well, I know that the President Erdogan of Turkey has actually said, they don't want to become again a sort of refugee deposit for the West's problems and the West's guilt, really, and so they're reluctant to take these refugees. But that's why I think the Vatican would like him as a kind of intermediary between the Taliban and Western nations to help try to come to some sort of solution which is acceptable to them and to all of the different governments in the region and the West too. So I think that's the reasoning behind that. And but it's really not clear what the extent of the communications are between all of these different parties with the Vatican. But it's something that they've done before. And in fact, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, this is one of his great one of the things that he's concerned most about, and what she thinks the Vatican can do most about too, and be most effective, which is mediating these kind of situations, and to try to be a sort of neutral party, and the different parties in the region can use the good offices of the Vatican, and so that's how Cardinal Parolin has looked at things in the past, and there are various examples of him doing that. In Venezuela is one of them, but also before he was Secretary of State, he did this too. So it's something that the Vatican has got more interested in during this pontificate, certainly, and I think they can really make a difference in that regard, and to bring and to help mediate conflicts like this.
And Ed, what about the issue of legitimizing the regime by recognizing it? That's always a very complicated issue for any country that has an oppressive regime. How do you think this is going to play out with Afghanistan?
Yes, I mean, it's hard to say. And I don't, as I say, I wasn't able to talk much with the missionary over there, so it's hard to get an idea on the ground. But certainly, from what I've read, I think it's going to be difficult in order to stop the Taliban becoming oppressive and going back to their old ways. I think because there'll be no troops left there, there'll be no allies, no NATO forces there. It'll be very difficult to control and check the Taliban and ensure that all the developments and advantages that they've achieved over the last 20 years will remain. So I think it's going to be difficult to do that. So this is why it really is, as many people are saying, a catastrophe, and it's really undoing all the work of the past 20 years to try to bring Afghanistan really into the modern world, or at least bring it away from what many say is the sort of dark ages of the Taliban.
And also, there's also this terrible risk of terrorism, the whole country becoming a breeding ground for attacks against the West. Yes,
this is another aspect which Aid to the Church in Need has raised, which is that they're concerned that there are now much more radical groups in Afghanistan than there were before, and that you've now got ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and you've also got growing groups of Islamists who aren't even belonging to them. There are other new groups sprouting up over there. So, yeah, they're very concerned about that, and obviously for the Christians there, that is very ominous for them too. And the fact that, as they point out, the fact that governments have withdrawn their embassies, they're no longer even represented there. There's no real check on what the Taliban does, and so it's very difficult for those minorities to be protected, and especially when you've got a growing Islamist population, which is what they predict will happen in the absence of these international observers and the Western presence there.
So this is just a total catastrophe for human rights in Afghanistan. It could be something that would mushroom into terrorism against the West. What more? So that you think the Vatican is doing what the Vatican can do best, and establishing relations and hopefully channels to get the right people out, the people that need to leave?
Yes. I mean, that's what they're hoping. Unfortunately, there isn't a Vatican embassy in Afghanistan. There's one in Pakistan, but there isn't a nunciature in Afghanistan, and so they don't have any representation there. But they do have lots of contacts, of course, in the diplomatic world across the world, and so they can use those to sort of leverage a better position, perhaps some bargaining position, so that the people do get a better deal through discussing these things with the Taliban. But yeah, that is what the Vatican can do. And as I say, under Cardinal Parolin, that's something that they've tried to do. Obviously, Cardinal Parolin has a bit of a checkered record with China and so forth. But in this sort of area, this is his strength, and I expect he's certainly trying to get the Vatican to play a constructive role in all of this.
So this is the Vatican intervening sort of on a grand scale in a very big world event, isn't it? But the Vatican has a history of doing this.
It does. There have been various achievements that the Vatican has made. Particularly, there was one in South America in between Chile and Argentina back in the early 80s, where they actually did prevent a war between Chile and Argentina. So the Vatican has been effective in the past. That was under John Paul II, of course. But yes, this is something that they can do. It's still very much, this is not being properly confirmed yet, but it does seem to be that that's what the Vatican will be doing, certainly trying to bring parties together, even if they don't achieve that. But certainly from this letter written by this Italian journalist, the Italians, or certainly this Italian in particular, was very happy about it, because he thinks that it could help prevent these Islamists coming over to Europe and causing attacks again, if there can be some sort of dialogue with the Taliban. But that could be a bit of a false hope, but who knows? It's certainly worth trying. I think that's the attitude.
Well, it's certainly worth praying for that, and the safety of all the poor people that are, I'm sure, cowering in place and just desperately wondering what's going to happen next as they're stuck in Afghanistan. And Ed, before we have to break off, I wanted to ask you about a good friend of yours that we love in the show is Cardinal Burke, and that many of us are praying for. What do you hear about his state of health?
Yes, well, I understand he's got much better. he's certainly making improvements. I believe that he's now back in his hospital room, having been in the ICU. So he's recovering there. I think it's going to take quite a while for him to get back to speed. I think it hit him obviously pretty hard, and it was getting very serious. And now but I do understand it really was quite a miracle that he pulled through, and that he is now better. And I think one of the most interesting aspects to this too is that he recovered over the Marian feast. Of course, he turned for the worst after the Assumption, but then he basically recovered or got out of the danger zone on the eve of the Feast of the Immaculate Heart in the traditional rite. So that was, I think, a very nice sort of conclusion to this, and certainly it was a fruit of a lot of prayer, a lot of people praying.
Well, we have to keep praying for him, because I'm sure until he's right back up on his feet, he needs our prayers to make sure he gets back out into the world where we need him. We need him in the church. We need Cardinal Burke and all the good the people in the church that bring us so much hope and so much just that faith that things are going to be okay, that the bark of Peter will keep sailing on and take us all to heaven.
Yes.
Right?
Indeed. Yeah.
So, Ed, thank you, Edward. Thank you very much for your time. It's always such a joy to chat with you, and we're grateful for your thorough analysis and reporting, especially on this case of Afghanistan. Please check out his work at the National Catholic Register. That's ncregister.com. Thank you, Edward.
Thanks, Grazie. Great to meet you.
Every morning, the Catholic Association reviews all the latest news and sends our subscribers a carefully curated collection of the most important news of the day. Items are specifically selected for a smart Catholic audience like you. Don't let the world take you by surprise. Subscribe to our daily media roundup at thecatholicassociation.org. And now, Father Roger Landry offers us, as is customary, a short and inspiring homily to prepare us for this Sunday's Gospel.
This is Father Roger Landry, and it's a privilege for me to be with you as we enter into the consequential conversation the risen Lord Jesus wants to have with each of us this Sunday, when after several weeks of focusing on Jesus' words to us in St. John's Gospel about Jesus' self-gift of himself in the Holy Eucharist, we return to St. Mark's Gospel, where Jesus will speak to us about the type of homage he's asking of us. It's a dramatic scene in which Jesus and his followers are criticized by the Pharisees for not obsessing about the ritual hand-washing traditionally done by Jews at the time before a meal. Jesus, the truth incarnate, responds with force and clarity. He calls the Pharisees hypocrites and cites the prophet Isaiah against them, saying, "This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines human precepts." And then Jesus tells the Pharisees, "You disregard God's commandments, but cling to human tradition." Jesus' words to the Pharisees were only seeming to serve the Lord, while their hearts and actions were doing otherwise. Would have come as a great shock to them and to all those who were listening. The Pharisees were considered extraordinarily faithful Jews. They went to the synagogue every Saturday. They prayed at least 3 times a day. They fasted twice a week, rather than just once a year, as other Jews did on the Day of Atonement. They paid tithes on their whole income, rather than just on the things explicitly mentioned in the Mosaic Law. They used to walk to the temple a few times a year to celebrate the major Jewish feasts, like Passover at the temple. They washed before every meal. They ate only kosher meat. They wore special clothes. And yet in all of this, Jesus says remarkably, "This people pays me lip service, but their hearts are far from me." And Jesus was right. The people who did all of these religious deeds were also the ones who ended up conspiring to kill Jesus, working together with their arch-enemies, the Herodians, the Sadducees, and the Romans, to have Jesus arrested, tortured, and ultimately crucified. Their hearts were indeed far from God. They were in fact not authentically religious at all, because in their hearts they were murderers instead of worshipers. But they thought they were exemplary believers because of the way they scrupulously adhered to their human traditions above God's clear commandments. St. Mark describes this weekend the complicated and rigorous practice of Jewish ceremonial washings, something that God hadn't revealed that he wanted done, but something that the scribes in the 4th and 5th centuries before Christ had developed to foster what they called ritual purity. It's key for us to grasp what they were doing, because not only does it help us to understand the gospel, but that tendency in human beings to substitute their man-made religious practices over what God, in fact, has himself commanded. The Jews needed to wash their hands in two directions with 1.5 eggshells of clean water. They first went from the fingertips down to the palms of their hands, and then they flipped their hands over and went from the bottom of their hands toward their fingertips with another 1.5 eggshells of clean water. They would then make fists and try to dry the water off their hands, making sure that they would only use the outside of their fists in order to dry the wet parts of their hand. This was the religious practice they obsessed about. And as if these collectively neurotic hygienic washings of hands, cups, jugs, kettles, and beds were what kept people in God's image and helped them to live in love with each other. In response to their challenge, Jesus summoned the crowd and taught them about the purity God himself wants. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus praised the pure of heart, saying, "They shall see God," and reminded us, where your heart is, there will your treasure be. Jesus had come into the world not to show us how to wash our hands, but to give us a heart transplant, to take out our heart of stone and replace it with a heart of flesh, cleansing us so that we might receive within the love of God, treasure it with gratitude, and then love God and love others as God has loved us first. So Jesus says to all those assembled, "Hear me, all of you, and understand. Nothing that enters someone from the outside can defile that person, but the things that come out from within are what defile." Jesus emphasized that nothing coming from the outside, either touching a jug or a ritually impure person, or even anything we eat, can make us impure in God's sight. The purity that God cares about, Jesus said, is what comes from the heart. The heart is the real core of the person, pointing to what we love and desire. It's what's in the heart, in the actions that flow from the heart, that renders a person pure or impure, holy or sinful, Jesus says. He states that it is from the heart, from what we desire, that sins like, he enumerates, evil thoughts, unchastity, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, licentiousness, envy, blasphemy, arrogance, and folly all come. These evil desires, he says, are what make us impure. And we see several of these evil desires, especially malice, deceit, envy, arrogance, and murderous thoughts, on evident display in the actions of the Pharisees. Jesus wants all of us to hear him and understand the truth he is describing. He wants this conversation with the Pharisees to be consequential in the way you and I understand our faith and live it. So we need to ask, am I a hypocrite like the Pharisees? Or do I live the faith with integrity? Do I cling to human traditions as a substitute for authentically clinging to God? What is the true treasure of my heart? In the core of my being, do I desire chastity? Or do I want to have my lusts fulfilled? Do I live with spiritual poverty, or give in to greed and envy? Am I faithful to God, to my spouse, and to others? Or am I adulterous and betray them? Do I desire the good of others, or wish them evil? Do I desire to praise God with my life? Or am I comfortable with blasphemy, just because so many others are doing so with their words and lifestyle? Am I humble or arrogant? Do I desire divine wisdom by studying Scripture, the Catechism, and the doctrines of the Church, and growing in the spirit of prayer? Or do I practically desire the folly of worldly ideas? There are many today who try to substitute human traditions for God's commands. They substitute football stadiums for churches on Sunday. They cling to liturgical practices more than they do to God and the sacraments. They substitute woke or politically correct ideas on human sexuality, gender, sex, marriage, and family for what God has revealed. They supplant the commandment not to kill, to permit the destruction of human life in the womb or in hospitals and nursing homes. They replace God's command to love our neighbor as ourselves with justifications for treating migrants and refugees like those now fleeing Afghanistan, or the poor and needy, or those of other races or religions with hardened hearts. We can multiply the examples. But the point of the gospel is not to become like the Pharisees in obsessing about how others are living, rather than examining deeply our own hearts. It's to make a commitment to ensure our hearts are as clean as the Pharisees wanted their hands to be. It's to honor God with both our lips and our hearts. It's to cling to his teaching in all its beauty and fullness. It's to take advantage of the sacrament of confession, in which God power washes our insides. It's to ensure that we place our treasure in the things of God and seek the opposite of what Jesus condemns. It means we commit to chastity, to generosity, self-sacrifice, faithful love, goodness, truthfulness, integrity, happiness when others are blessed, praise of God and others, humility, and true wisdom. It's to respond to Jesus who says, "Hear me, all of you, and understand," with great attention, comprehension, and action. God bless you all.
Thank you, Father Landry. To hear more from Father Landry, check out his website at catholicpreaching.com, and you can also catch his writings at EWTN's own National Catholic Register. A big thank you to all our listeners for joining us. I hope that this show was helpful. I hope that it gave you more peace and more hope and more joy, and you go with our prayers.